Since the Formula 1 World Championship began in 1950, there have been a total of 34 different drivers world champions, and of those 34, 10 have been British. That's 29% of all F1 drivers champions ever. And for the upcoming 2022 season, there'll be 3 British drivers on the grid, all of whom look to have a chance of winning it all: Lewis Hamilton, Lando Norris and George Russell. Now, Hamilton is currently the face of British motorsport and has been for the majority of his Formula 1 career. But given his age at 37 and the seemingly constant rumours of his retirement, I can't imagine he'll be in F1 for too much longer, which means it won't be long before someone has to take his place as Britain's best active F1 driver. It could be this season, the next, or maybe the one after that. But whenever it does happen, it will be either Lando Norris or George Russell. Hey guys, it's Taran and welcome to the On Track channel, and in today's video we'll be taking a look at the careers of the 2 young British drivers, from karting through the junior series and their last 3 years in Formula 1, in order to try and see who's more likely to take over the title of F1's current best British driver. Before we get going, do make sure to give the video a thumbs up if you enjoy, and click the subscribe button for more F1 related content. Now let's get started. Beginning with Lando Norris, he was born in Bristol, a city in southwest England, on the 13th of November 1999, making him just 22 years old at the start of what will already be his 4th Formula 1 season. George Russell, on the other hand, was born in Kings Lynn, a town in eastern England and also the birthplace of former F1 driver and current Sky Sports commentator Martin Brundle. Russell is a little older than Norris, having been born on the 15th of February 1998, making him 24 years old to start the 2022 season. Their first season competing against each other came all the way back in 2008 with the Super 1 National Championship Cadet class. It's worth remembering that through their careers, Lando is 19 months younger than George, and at least to start with that will have made a difference when head to head. Now in 2008, Lando finished 35th, with George doing a bit better in 20th. The next season, however, saw a good improvement from both drivers, with Norris up 21 places to 14th and George Russell almost taking the title, finishing 2nd. It's also worth noting that in the next season, Lando improved once again, finishing 3rd. After 2009, while they both progressed through various championships and series, they were often in different classes, and so for the remaining karting seasons, I've taken the series that they both raced in, but taken Norris's result from 1 or 2 seasons after Russell to try and compare. The first of these is the Super 1 National Championship for the Rotax Mini Max class, where in 2012 Lando Norris finished 2nd and in 2010 George Russell won. Then in 2013 and 2014 they both competed in the FIA World Karting Championship, with Russell competing against the likes of Max Verstappen and Lance Stroll, but only managing 17th place. For Norris, he was up against the likes of Callum Ilott and Nikita Mazepin. Not quite as high a standard as Russell's competition, but he still went out and won, giving us this clip of little Lando Norris all suited and booted collecting his trophy. So while they both had very good karting careers, winning multiple championships and series, I've got to give the edge to Lando. The next most comparable seasons were in the FIA Formula 3 European Championship, where George Russell competed full-time in 2015 and 2016 and Lando Norris competed full-time in the 2017 season. In his first year, Russell beat the likes of Callum Ilott and Alex Albon to finish 6th with 203 points. Pretty respectable, but just behind notable drivers such as Daddy's Cash Lance Stroll, Charles Leclerc and Italian Jesus. Then in 2016 he once again finished ahead of Ilott, this time collecting 264 points, enough for 3rd place, but was once again beaten by Lance Stroll, who went full god mode that year, winning 14 of 30 races. A year later, just after George moved up to GP3, Lando Norris gave it a go. It's fair to say that the competition wasn't quite as strong, competing against the likes of Mick Schumacher, Nikita Mazepin, Guan Yu Zhou and somehow still Callum Ilott, but he had to go out and beat them he did, finishing first by 53 points, a pretty decent margin. Picking a better driver through this time for me is tricky. While Russell faced better drivers like Charles Leclerc and Lance Stroll, I still have to just give the edge to Lando. Regardless of the specific competitors, it's still a very good championship, and winning on your first attempt has to count for something. Now fast forward to 2018 and they were finally back competing against each other full time in the FIA Formula 2 Championship. Lando Norris would be racing with Carlin alongside Sergio Sette Camara, whereas further down the pit lane Russell would be teammates with Jack Aitken at ART. Over the course of the year, the 2 young Brits would be going head to head across 12 tracks and 24 races, with Norris getting off to a great start in the feature race in Bahrain, taking pole position, the fastest lap and most importantly the race win, in what was a pretty dominant performance. Russell on the other hand, well, he kinda stalled on the front row. While Norris had the early lead in the championship, Russell started to come back. He was on to win the feature race in Azerbaijan if it wasn't for a completely misjudged Nick de Vries dive bomb. He made up for it though, winning the Baku sprint race as well as the feature race in Spain. So after 3 rounds, Norris led the championship by 13 points and was 18 clear of Russell in third. Lando then capitalised on double DNFs for Russell and Albon at Monaco, after George hit the barriers not once but twice and Albon was spun around at the pit lane entry. But in France, things really started to improve for Russell after he successfully fended off Sete Camara for the win in the feature race, having already taken pole position. He then followed that up with a double podium at the Red Bull Ring, winning the feature race from pole and then finishing second in the sprint. Meanwhile, Norris finished second in the feature race but could only manage 11th in the sprint, and so at the halfway stage, 6 rounds in, George Russell had taken over the lead of the championship by 10 points. Next up was Silverstone, a home race for both of them. Russell took pole and was leading the feature race only to lose out to Alex Albon due to a slow pit stop. But second was still a good result given Norris finished 10th after his car just sort of died. For the sprint, both drivers had a great race and finished on the podium with George just ahead in P2. Next up in Hungary, it all went wrong for Russell before the feature race even started, with his clutch losing the will to live, subsequently retiring and gaining no points in the process. Meanwhile, his rival Norris was pulling off some great moves on the wet Hungary track. For the sprint, they were back in the dry and Norris picked up more good points finishing 4th, and despite a good drive through the field to 8th by Russell, it would only yield a single point. So the net result of Hungary was a 25-point gain for Norris. In Spa, he would gain a little more. Russell took 3rd in the feature race with Norris 1 spot behind, but for the sprint, after some great moves by Lando meant he took P2, Russell could only manage 7th. So after 9 rounds with just 3 remaining, the gap at the top of the championship was just 5 points. In Monza, despite losing places off the start, Russell still managed to finish ahead of Norris in the feature race. He then had a great start in the sprint and battled past a few cars, to eventually take the win, his 5th of the season. Now, the next races in Sochi would ultimately turn out to be where the championship was lost for Lando. Both cars were sitting in the lower points before it all went wrong. First, he drove into the wrong pit box, but that's not too bad, maybe costing a second or so. But then this happened. The front right wasn't attached and he ultimately retired. For Russell, despite being overtaken by Latifi, he managed P4 and a good haul of points. In the sprint, Lando started from the back and was making good progress until the rain came down, falling back to 15th before a puncture would see him retire again. And while Norris would score no points, Russell took them all, taking the race win and fastest lap to boot. So just like that, over 2 rounds, a 5-point gap became 34 and Alex Albon was now ahead of Norris in the championship. So going into the final round at Abu Dhabi, it was all but over. Russell picked up his 7th win of the season and a podium for Norris in the sprint saw him retake 2nd place, with the final standings having Russell on top by a pretty substantial margin. For the F2 season, they both had great years, but the eventual standings, as well as Russell's 7 wins to Norris's 1, means that 2018 goes to George Russell. 2019 would see both drivers make the step up into Formula 1. Russell joined Williams as the Mercedes-backed driver, while Norris took his place alongside Carlos Sainz at McLaren. So the season as a whole is a little tricky to judge, mostly because, well, the FW42 was a crime to motorsport, being horrendously slow with both Williams cars knocked out of every Q1 session in 2019. But you still have your teammate to beat, or in the case of George Russell, destroy. He outqualified Robert Kubica every single time, with an average gap of 0.625 seconds. He showed good race pace, often coming close to points, and yes, Kubica did score the team's only point in Germany, but that race is a nominee for craziest of all time. He did as good of a job as anyone could in that car, and even when racing at the back, managed to get the F1 world's attention. For Norris, he would score his first points in just his 2nd race in Bahrain. Throughout the season, he was generally there or thereabouts, picking up points here and there. He wasn't helped by a number of mechanical problems, such as his brakes melting the car in Canada, and an engine issue in Belgium.
It's broken! It's broken!
So while it was a solid season, he finished almost 50 points back from his teammate, and so I'm going to give the 2019 season to George Russell, but only just. In 2020, once the world had recovered, sort of, Norris took a podium in the first race of the season. It was a strong start and that continued throughout the year. He beat Sainz in the qualifying battle but finished just behind in the final standings. He did double his points tally from last year though. George Russell's season on the other hand was a lot more undulating. While he consistently beat Latifi in qualifying and generally showed very good race pace, he could never quite get over the final hurdle and pick up points. In Mugello he was 9th before a red flag restart dropped him down to 11th, and in Imola he was running in the points before, well, yeah. A few rounds later he got his big chance at the Sakhir Grand Prix, replacing Lewis Hamilton, who was ill. Despite no proper time in the car, he very nearly outqualified Bottas, though P2 on the grid wouldn't matter as he took the lead into the first corner and was in pretty good control, until Mercedes messed it all up, fitting the wrong tyre to Russell's car before a slow puncture forced him to pit again. But we'd already seen what he could do. He qualified well and raced well, all in a top car he had very little time in. To compare 2020, I'd call it roughly even. While Russell had the higher highs, such as his performance in Sakhir, he also had the lower lows, i.e. Imola. Norris, on the other hand, was generally good and consistent, and gave solid performances throughout the season. The last year to compare is 2021. Both cars took a step forward pace-wise, and both drivers had good seasons. Starting with George, he did well. As usual, he was out-qualifying Latifi pretty easily, but really came into form during the middle of the season, scoring points in Hungary before putting the car P2 and qualifying for the Belgium Grand Prix, which would turn out to be P2 in the race that supposedly happened. He then picked up points in Monza and Russia, making it 4 out of 5 point-scoring races in a row. With Lando, he picked up 4 podiums across the season, 3 third places and a second place in Monza. He also convincingly beat his more experienced teammate Daniel Ricciardo, both in qualifying and in the races. He very nearly won in Russia until he didn't, and until the summer break it was a very real possibility that he could finish third in the championship, behind only Hamilton and Verstappen. Ultimately, with Ferrari improving, he finished P6 but showed just how good he can be. For many people, he was a top 3 driver in the 2021 season, and deservedly so. With that, Lando takes the final season comparison after an amazing performance in 2021, really taking a step up. Overall, it's clear they're both incredibly talented drivers, and in the right machinery will be challenging for wins and potentially titles. I think the general trend is that Russell tends to start off a little quicker, but Norris then soon catches up and just edges out Russell. Remember, Norris is 19 months younger. The way I could see things panning out is that for 2021, I could see Russell being slightly ahead, especially if Mercedes are as good as they have been. But then for the future, I think Norris may well end up on top, with his consistency and record of continuously improving playing a key role. Anyways, that is all for now. Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below, as well as any feedback and suggestions. If you did enjoy, make sure to give the video a thumbs up and subscribe for more F1 related content. So until next time, take care.